Well, apparently there are negotiations going on between the United States and a senior Iranian official. We talked about this last week about how there were rumors, there was reporting that that the Trump administration was speaking to Iranian Parliament Speaker Galibaf, and I talked about who he is. He's a very bad dude, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes. We're going to get into the whole issue of what is actually happening with these negotiations, what we might expect to see in the days ahead. Before we get into all of that, please be sure to go to Israel365charity.com and help out. There's a lot of demands on the home front, a lot of families who are struggling with a lot of the fallout of what's going on with the war and the Passover holiday coming up. Israel 365 Charity is plugged in to a lot of great people on the ground, and your money will get into the right hands, helping these families who are dealing with a whole range of issues. So Israel365charity.com. Please give generously. Please go there, drop a few nickels in the bucket. Now, to start this video, I want to play an old clip that I've played in a few videos on this channel. It's been a while since we looked at it. Frankly, I think about this clip almost every day these days. This is from a speech that Trump gave in April of 2016. He was not yet even the Republican candidate. He hadn't had the nomination. He was running for president, and this was his first major foreign policy address. It was given on April 27th, 2016, and I just want to play you a 20-second clip of it. If you've been with me for the last few months on this channel, you've probably seen this clip before, but it's always worth going back to. Here we go.
And then there's ISIS. I have a simple message for them. Their days are numbered. I won't tell them where, and I won't tell them how. We must as a nation, be more unpredictable. We are totally predictable. We tell everything. We're sending troops, we tell them. We're sending something else, we have a news conference. We have to be unpredictable. And we have to be unpredictable starting now.
Okay, this clip is huge. It's monumentally important because all of this speculation, all of the talk that you hear in the media, oh, Trump changes his mind, he looks confused, he's giving these mixed signals, and there's a prevailing wisdom out there that Trump's foreign policy is confused and that he's unsure, and that's why you're hearing him say conflicting things. But Trump said this himself right here, and notice he was reading from the teleprompter. His belief in the best way to handle foreign policy, and here he wasn't talking about foreign policy like doing a trade deal with with a European nation. He's talking about dealing with enemies. And in that context, he said that it's important for America to be unpredictable. This is a doctrine. I call it the doctrine of unpredictability. I wrote a column about it in the Jerusalem Post as well a number of months ago, that this confusion people have about what he's thinking is deliberate. And we're going to see as through the rest of this video, the reason I played it in this video specifically, because what we're going to look carefully at in a few minutes is how Iranian state media is dealing with all of these mixed signals and the whole negotiations issue. And you can see that this doctrine of unpredictability is actually driving them a little nuts. So let's get right into the rest of this. So first of all, this story broke yesterday. Trump puts Iran on notice, reveals to the Post, this is an interview with the New York Post that Trump did. He revealed to the Post his 1-week ultimatum for new speaker after Tehran's attack on Israeli oil refinery. President Trump on Monday put Iran and the Speaker of the Islamic Republic's parliament on notice after Tehran attacked Israel's biggest oil refinery and told the New York Post that his response is coming shortly. Iran escalated its attack on infrastructure by striking a water and electrical plant in Kuwait, and an oil refinery was set ablaze in the northern Israeli city of Haifa after the Iranian missile attack. As for his response, he told the Post, "You'll see shortly." As Trump brings more military might into the region that could inflict catastrophic damage on Iran, he encouraged what's left of Iran's regime to make a deal before it's too late and said he would hit them where it really hurt, their energy infrastructure. He exclusively told the Post that the U.S. will find out whether the speaker is willing to work with Americans soon. We're going to find out. Trump told the Post when asked about Iran's Mohammed Bagher Galibaf, "I'll let you know that in about a week." Galibaf issued his own warning in response, writing on social media that attacking Iran's infrastructure would be a big mistake. The enemy promotes its desires as news while threatening our nation at the same time. Big mistake. If they hit one, they'll take several back. God willing, the people of Iran, under the leadership of the supreme leader, will make the enemy regret the aggression and reclaim their rights, he wrote. The president, Trump, described a dramatic shakeup inside Iran, claiming the old guard has effectively been wiped out and replaced by a new group he said has so far been easier to work with. Quote, "There has been a total regime change because the regimes of the past are gone and we're dealing with a whole new set of people," Trump said. And thus far, they've been much more reasonable. Okay, pressed on whether these are new figures compared to the past adversaries in Tehran, Trump didn't mince words. Pretty much the other people are all dead. And then they talk about how the supreme leader could very well be dead. Several major figures in Iran's leadership have died. Okay, Trump's decision to give Galibaf a week could be tied to his April 6th deadline for Iran to come to a peace deal with America. It's unclear how safe the Iranian speaker is or if he's on any type of kill list. The White House did not respond to an inquiry on the matter. Iranian leaders have not publicly confirmed that they are participating in talks with the U.S. Meanwhile, their blockade of the Strait of Hormuz has shaken stock markets around the world. Okay, and then later on, they say in this interview, Trump said, "Great progress has been made." He's talking about the negotiations. If for any reason a deal is not shortly reached, which it probably will be, it's Trump always expressing optimism about a deal. And if the Hormuz Strait is not immediately open for business, we will conclude our lovely stay in Iran by blowing up and completely obliterating all of their electric generating plants, oil wells, and Karg Island. Okay, that's pretty much it for this. Now, who is this guy Galibaf? So I did a video about him recently. I also did an interview on Israel 365 News with Dr. David Wormser, where we talked about who Galibaf is. So Galibaf is a guy who is a career IRGC thug. He made his rise through the ranks came from being especially brutal to citizens. He was behind the massacre of protesters in 1999 when there were student protests, and he was one of the main people behind the mass murder of Iranian citizens back in January. He is a brutal thug. Of all the people in the Iranian regime, he may be the most hated and feared by the Iranian people. So when Trump says that all the top other people are gone and this is really a regime change, if Galibaf is the guy, I've said this before, if Galibaf is the guy that Trump tries to do a Venezuela deal with, where he's empowering whatever remains of the regime after decapitating the top, and if he does that with Galibaf, it will be understood correctly by the people in Iran that it wasn't really regime change. Okay, so be that as it may, how are the Iranians responding? So on Tasnim, so I've said this before, there are two major English language Iranian state media outlets. Okay, there's one called Wana, and we're going to look at them as well, and there's one called Tasnim. Tasnim is more of the mouthpiece of the IRGC, of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. That's all the thugs, and that's the more radical, more hardline side of the regime. And then there's Wana, which is much more of a kind of narrative framing, kind of propaganda outlet on behalf of the regime. And they're not always in lockstep. We'll see this here. So here's today's front page of Tasnim. And you notice that there isn't even any mention in the top stories of the negotiations. IRGC launches blitz on the U.S. Israeli targets in Iran to end war only on its own terms. And they're quoting Masoud Pezeshkian. And then it says Pezeshkian lauds Iraqi support amid U.S.-Israeli war. And then it says the Iranian army shot down enemy drones. Iran condemns the strikes on steel plants. Iran rejects Ukraine's baseless allegations. Iran strikes U.S. command centers. Talks about how they hanged a few opposition people. And it goes on and on and on. And there's no mention There's no mention until we get all the way down near the bottom here. Iran refutes any talks with the U.S. Okay, their only comment on the negotiations is that they refute that there are any talks. Okay, and the rest of it is all about their aggression. But I want to focus in on these two stories here, two stories back to back, both about Masoud Pezeshkian. Now, he's the president. The president of Iran is a figurehead, doesn't really have a whole lot of power, but he's generally responsible more for civil matters, civil governance, whereas the IRGC is more focused on the power of the regime and the terrorist network and all of that. So Pezeshkian has been reportedly sidelined. He is known to be more of a moderate. In fact, he beat out Galibaf in the election to become president. The president is still, like everyone else, subservient to the supreme leader and the IRGC. But since this war has started, there's been reports of Pezeshkian really trying to end this thing and negotiate, and the IRGC digging in and refusing to negotiate. And there was a report on Israeli Channel 14 News, Dror Balazadeh, who's fluent in Persian, and he has a lot of sources in Iran, and he is the lead journalist who covers Iran for Channel 14 cable news in Israel. Extremely well sourced. He often breaks stories because he has informants in the Iranian regime. And he put out a report, and his reports are very credible. He put out a report yesterday that says as follows: exclusive, the hostage president, senior Iran analyst Dror Balazadeh, reveals explosive leaked details of a deepening rift between President Pezeshkian and the Revolutionary Guards. In a heated confrontation, Pezeshkian reportedly lashed out at the IRGC commander-in-chief, warning, quote, "You're ruling the country like suicidals. If this continues for another 3 weeks, the economy will collapse." The sources reveal a presidency under total siege. The IRGC has seized control of all security, civil, and economic issues. These are things they're not supposed to be governing. Pezeshkian has been repeatedly blocked from resigning. He can't even resign. The IRGC is sidelining the president from U.S. negotiations, fearing he will, quote, "give everything to end sanctions," meaning they're worried that he will actually make a deal. They don't want to make a deal. And listen to this quote from Pezeshkian. "I feel like a hostage," Pezeshkian reportedly claimed. "The only job I have is to read your crazy scripts." That's what he said to the IRGC guys. These leaks confirm the IRGC now holds absolute control, steering Iran toward an increasingly extreme and dangerous path. Now, obviously, the IRGC, the regime, doesn't want to project outwardly that there's this infighting and there's this disagreement at the top levels of the regime. So I found it very interesting that on Tasnim, they specifically run these two stories that quote Pezeshkian, Iran to end war only on its own terms, as though Pezeshkian is now lining up with the hardliners. And also Pezeshkian lauds Iraqi support amid U.S.-Israeli war. So here they're trying to project outwardly that Pezeshkian is in lockstep with the IRGC. That's the purpose of these two stories. They want to project unity and stability because there's reports like this one by Dror Balazadeh that are saying that the regime has a lot of infighting and instability in it. Okay, that's what that is about. Meanwhile, Iran refutes any talks with U.S. This was also from yesterday. Spokesperson for the Iranian Foreign Ministry emphasized that Tehran has had no direct negotiations with the United States. Now, that completely contradicts President Trump and rejects claims that the Islamic Republic has agreed to Washington's proposals, describing any such assertions as baseless. In comments at his weekly press conference on Monday, Bakai responded to U.S. President Donald Trump's claims that Iran had accepted U.S. proposals. He reiterated that Iran's position has been consistent from the start, rejecting excessive and unreasonable demands through intermediaries. Okay. Again, he stated that Iran has had no direct negotiations. Repeats it a few times in here. He noted that it's unclear how many in the U.S. take their own claims of diplomacy seriously. He emphasized that Iran's stance is clear and does not shift as the U.S. position does. Okay. He concluded that U.S. claims are not considered credible, noting that Iran has experienced previous betrayals during negotiations firsthand. The U.S. and the Israeli regime launched a large-scale, unprovoked military campaign against Iran following the assassination of leader of the Islamic Revolution, Ali Khamenei, along with several other senior military commanders and civilians on February 28th. Right, and because their narrative is that we were in the middle of negotiating, and the Americans were just using negotiations as a cover to prepare for the next attack, and therefore they're accusing Trump of doing the same thing now. Okay, that's and saying that we're not really involved in any negotiations. Meanwhile, in Iran International, this is an opposition Iranian outlet that's actually based in England, but so it covers Iranian news, but from an opposition standpoint. And they also, the Iranian opposition in exile does not want there to be a deal with Galibaf. That's an important point. Again, the Iranian opposition in exile does not want a deal if it means that Galibaf stays in power. Because from the perspective of Iranians, Galibaf remaining in power means that the regime remains in power. It means that the IRGC remains in power. It means the Basij and all the thugs who've been oppressing the Iranian people remain in power. That's what that means. Unfortunately, Trump keeps signaling that he wants this Venezuela model where you keep people from the regime at the top level that you can deal with, and that holds the system together, and that's who you deal with. Okay, so if Trump actually is talking about how Galibaf is a reasonable person and he wants to deal with him, that's a bad sign. And therefore you see that the opposition is trying to throw cold water on this. Galibaf and Trump escalate rhetoric as prospects for talks remain vague. At the diplomatic level, reports suggest indirect contacts are continuing, even as the gap between public rhetoric and behind-the-scenes diplomacy appears wider than ever. Okay, Galibaf accused the United States of duplicity, saying Washington was publicly speaking of negotiations while privately preparing for escalation. He warned that Iranian forces were ready to inflict heavy losses on any U.S. troops attempting a ground operation, as well as on the regional allies. Okay, so this is being echoed over and over again from the Iranians, that they believe that these negotiations are really just a cover for preparing the next attack, which maybe they are. Remember Trump. Remember that clip I played to start this video of Trump talking about being unpredictable. But this is what the Iranians are saying, which means that they're digging in, and the reason that Iran International is elevating that is they want to project, this Iranian opposition group wants the message of this news item to be that the Iranians aren't serious about this and that the negotiations aren't really going to go anywhere. Okay, now let's go over to WANA. This is Iranian state media. So their front page today, and if you've been with me before when I've done reviews of Iranian state media, top news, the top story is never really a news item, and this is common in totalitarian regimes where state media, the top story in state media will often be an editorial because it's basically laying out policy. So their top story today is Trump's 2 scenarios for ending the conflict with Iran. And what they lay out in this piece is that there are 2 possibilities for what Trump has in mind, for what he's doing with these negotiations. So what they say here is, following the direct U.S. attack on Iran, the American administration initially appeared to believe that a combination of targeted assassinations and limited strikes could deliver a tactical advantage and give them and move and make this a quick victory. Okay, and then it says that Iran responded rapidly, and because of all of this, taken together, these developments deprived America and Israel not only of the prospect of victory, but even of the feeling of victory. Now, roughly a month into the conflict, the consequences of that strategic shift are becoming increasingly visible. Following the military developments, the UN condemned, saying that the UN's Human Rights Council condemned America and Israel for attacking them. On the broader level, the effects of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz are beginning to show up in the global economy and international livelihoods, while Washington has so far demonstrated neither the capacity nor an effective mechanism to open it. On the military front, enemy air defense systems have struggled to contain Iran's missile barrages, and even advanced American aircraft, such as the F-35, have not been beyond the reach of Iranian air defenses. That's all not true. Alongside these developments, the Iranian Republic's strategy of combining resistance with negotiation has increasingly been presented both domestically and abroad as a more rational and defensible approach. The cumulative result of these developments is that the United States and Israel have not only failed to secure a decisive victory, but have also lost the ability to credibly and cost-effectively claim an absolute victory. Under these conditions, Trump faces a fundamental problem: how to exit the conflict without allowing defeat to be formally stamped on the White House. And then they go into the two options for Trump. Two scenarios before Trump. Scenario number one: declare victory and end the conflict unilaterally. Okay, before we get into the two scenarios they lay out here for the two options Trump has now going forward, let me explain what's going on. Trump has, as we said, he's deliberately unpredictable. This is why I started the video with that. He's deliberately unpredictable. And he is driving them a little nuts. And that's why they're writing articles like this that try to figure out the different options that Trump has and project what Trump is thinking and what Trump's strategy is. So why do they do that? Not to show their cards, but it's a way of saying, you're not fooling us. We have you figured out. You think that you're fooling us. You think that you're keeping us guessing. No. We know exactly what you're doing. So here's the chessboard, and here is exactly what you're trying to pull on us. Okay, it's a way of projecting power and saying we're on to you. Okay, so scenario number one: declare victory and end the conflict. The first scenario, and the less costly option for Trump, would be for the US president to declare an end to the conflict through media and messaging alone, without any meaningful shift on the battlefield, while simultaneously claiming victory. Okay? Trump has done this before. When the US was attacking the Houthis last year, they inflicted some damage, but originally Trump said he would wipe them out. He didn't. And then he just said, okay, we've done what we planned to do, and he left. Now, it's true they stopped a lot of the attacks on global shipping, but that wasn't the original intent of that operation. So they're betting, and I've been saying this since before the war, they're betting that because of all of these problems in the Straits of Hormuz and the rise in oil prices and the pressure domestically to end this thing, that Trump is looking for an off-ramp, and therefore they're saying Trump could just declare victory and go away. In the eyes of many observers, this is the most likely option currently available to the White House. Under this scenario, Trump would attempt to rely on media framing and narrative management to portray withdrawal not as a retreat, but as a successful completion of the limited objectives. The problem, however, is that such a claim would be difficult to sustain, even if amplified by the American media apparatus, because it would ring hollow in the eyes of both the U.S. and the U.S.'s allies. Okay, that's number one. Okay, so scenario number two: a big move to manufacture the image of victory. Okay, so scenario number one that Trump has, option number one that the Iranians are saying that Trump has to end the war, is just to declare victory and say we've accomplished our goals and leave. And that is a possibility. Trump could do that. It's unlikely considering the behavior. The second scenario is far riskier, and in the logic of this analysis, far more reckless. In this version, Trump might seek to escape the current deadlock and create a more tangible image of victory by pursuing a dramatic but costly action. And it would be large enough to offset other setbacks, and it would look like a big achievement. That big bite could take the form of a high-profile commando raid inside Iran, an attempt to temporarily seize one of Iran's islands in the Persian Gulf, or a visible but limited strike on critical Iranian infrastructure, especially in the energy sector. In other words, they're saying scenario number two is that Trump wants to project the image of victory that's more convincing than scenario number one, and therefore he's going to do some dramatic big-time operation that looks like it's changing the balance of things. Maybe attacking, as he says, seizing one of the islands in the Persian Gulf, attacking Iranian infrastructure connected to energy, something like that, or high-profile commando raid. Within this framework, some analysts also point to more complex, chaos-driven possibilities. Okay. And it says, and then they go through the different details of this. Iran's islands, a potential trap for an American gamble. From the perspective of some analytical circles in Iran, they always do this. If Trump moves toward the second scenario, he will be stepping into risks that extend far beyond the assumptions of the American military and security establishment. In other words, the idea of seizing an Iranian island pushes Trump toward an impulsive commando operation, which would actually unfold on the ground What would actually unfold on the ground may bear little resemblance to the victory image. Okay, so that could be risky. So they're saying, okay, the seizure of an island, which would be one dramatic option for scenario number 2, could be a little too costly. Okay. And then it says another option is striking infrastructure. That's another version of option 2. Another version of the second scenario, where Trump wants to do some big dramatic act to signal victory, would involve a limited but highly visible attack on Iran's energy infrastructure and strategic facilities. Yet even this option, according to the same line of analysis, offers no guarantee of shifting the balance. Okay, first, if Washington were to move in this direction, it would likely not be seeking an all-out war, but rather a limited operation intended to produce psychological shock and media impact. The problem is that Iran's energy architecture, contrary to the assumptions of some Americans, is neither entirely centralized nor easily crippled. And therefore, even if Trump chose some big attack on an energy facility, it wouldn't have the desired effect. Second, Iran's options are not confined to defense within its own borders. Tehran could respond by escalating missile strikes on sensitive targets, extending maritime pressure from the Strait of Hormuz to Bab el-Mandeb, or activating allied fronts against Israel elsewhere in the region. Bab el-Mandeb, let's just review what that means. Let's pull it up on screen. Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Let's go to the map. Let's go to the map. Get rid of that. Okay. This is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. Here, let's pull out a little more. Here we go. Here's Iran. Here's the Straits of Hormuz. This is where all the fighting's taking place. Straits of Hormuz. Here's Iran. Here's Saudi Arabia. Here's Yemen. This is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait down here. Okay, down here. This is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and this is where the Houthis are. So here, what they're saying in this piece is, look, the retaliation, if Trump wants to try to do some dramatic thing like hitting some energy infrastructure or taking one of the islands in the Persian Gulf, we have ways of escalating. We could shut down shipping in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which would only make the problem Trump's trying to solve in the Straits of Hormuz even worse, because we could cut off even more global shipping. How would they do that? With their Houthi proxies, which is why it's notable that the Houthis joined the war a couple days ago, started firing missiles and drones at Israel again. Okay, so and then they say, here's how they end the piece. The broader conclusion of this analysis is that under the second scenario, Trump is already in a structurally losing position. Any attempt to manufacture an artificial victory through limited but high-risk operations offers no guarantee of success and may instead drag Washington into a deeper and more dangerous quagmire. See, they're playing to the fears of Trump, of the Trump administration, of getting entangled in a quagmire. In this framework, Trump's current position resembles that of a man trapped up to his neck in a deep swamp. The only fragile lifeline still within his reach is to pull back from the confrontation with Iran and declare it over in whatever form he can. In other words, option number 1. The alternative, thrashing harder through limited strikes on energy infrastructure and adventurous commando operations, may still remain on the table, but for many observers, its outcome is already predictable: higher costs, a deeper crisis, and a heavier defeat. This is an amazing piece. Okay, let's just sum up what just happened here. Stay with me. Since the beginning of the war, since before the war, I've been saying that the entire strategy of the Iranian regime, they know they can't beat the Americans on the battlefield. They're not even trying to. The Americans and the Israelis, they're not even trying to. That is not their strategy. Their strategy is only to prolong this, to cause the gas prices to rise, to cause more global instability, to make the whole world uneasy about this, to cause political problems at home for Trump because of these economic issues that the war is causing, to make it last longer than Trump wants it to last, and to make Trump impatient, and that shifts the leverage in the negotiations in their direction. If Trump wants to end the war and is desperate to move forward on that, then they gain and they have a chance at surviving. They don't care how much damage is done to their country. Okay, let's make it clear. All they care about is that the regime is still in charge when the dust settles, because then they can play ball with Trump, keep their head down until the end of the Trump administration. The Chinese will come in with their money. The Chinese need to rebuild Iran. It's a very important asset for them. The Russians also have an interest in this. And the Chinese helped Iran rebuild very quickly after the 12-day war. and they could reconstitute themselves. Their whole goal in this war is to simply drag it out, escalate, and stay in power. And here they lay out with Trump signaling, they're reading between the lines and saying, it looks like he's trying to end this. Trump keeps talking about, he originally said it will be 5 weeks or so. We're coming up on that. They know that Trump keeps talking about there's going to be a deal very soon. We've destroyed them. We basically won. They see Trump looking for an off-ramp. So what they're signaling here is, dude, you got a choice. You can either just end this now, in which case we're still, you could say it's victory, but you're gone and we're still in power. Or you can try something dramatic, but that's also not going to work out for you. This is a way of signaling to Trump that he's better off just ending the war now and leaving, and that any other option is only going to be worse for him. And then they also had this other piece up, which was posted a couple days ago, a 10-day pause or an exit plan. And this is similar stuff. It goes through all the options of why Trump extended the deadline on his ultimatum for the Iranians to make a deal, this 10-day pause, right? So is it performative diplomacy, building a shield of legitimacy while he prepares for the next strike? Is it just a military pause while they assess the damage and reposition their naval assets and move equipment into the region? Which, by the way, is a real suspicion the Iranians have. Let's go back to this map. Right now, the U.S. has a couple of aircraft carriers in this area here in the Mediterranean. One of them is in Crete. And the plan is to move them down through the Suez Canal and bring them down through the Red Sea and get over there to join the fighting. They could even join the fighting by porting here in Saudi Arabia and then flying sorties across Saudi Arabia. They could do that too. But that's one common speculation right now by experts that perhaps that's why the Houthis have just joined the war and started firing missiles at Israel, because they want to make it uncomfortable for the Americans to move those aircraft carriers down into the Red Sea. So they're speculating that maybe that's what Trump is doing with the 10-day break. And then it says, controlled ambiguity, a war advanced through uncertainty. This is great. This is them interpreting Trump's unpredictability doctrine. Announcing 10 days of patience generates several conflicting signals at once. And they might be right about this, by the way. For Iran, it raises the question of whether the attack has been canceled or postponed. For the U.S. allies, it creates uncertainty over whether Washington is still prepared to escalate or is looking to reduce tensions for an off-ramp. And for public opinion, it suggests that the crisis may be nearing its end, which is good for oil prices. The ambiguity is itself a tool of pressure. It keeps the other side waiting. It suspends its calculations and slows decision-making. In many wars, controlled uncertainty, bolded, look at that, only bolded words here. Controlled uncertainty becomes as much a part of the operation as the strikes themselves. This is an absolutely fascinating section here, paragraph, because it's very accurate. It's saying this is what Trump is doing by giving mixed signals. It's controlled ambiguity. And I think they're right about this. And this is why I said they're freaking out. This piece and the previous piece that I showed you are just trying to interpret Trump's mixed messages. You can see that they're freaking out, that they're confused. So their coping mechanism is to put out there all of the analysis that covers all the bases, and then they can kind of, it's weird, but they can say that they can kind of save face by saying that they understood what Trump was doing all along. Look, we just said it. And they said, and that it might be preparing an exit operation. Might be, this 10 days might be a cover for them just planning to get out of there. And then they finish off, they have, what do they have? Oh, I'm sorry, they have 6 options for what Trump is doing with this ambiguity. One of them is a gap between Washington and Tel Aviv, that it's signaling that America is doing things more, is thinking about more different factors in the war. Israel seeks rapid, hard, maximalist blows, whereas the United States thinks beyond the battlefield to energy markets, domestic political costs, potential casualties, regional spillover, and the risks of being dragged into a prolonged war. And that that is why any pause is not necessarily only a message to Iran, but it could also be a message to Tel Aviv, a message suggesting that Washington may no longer be willing to absorb unlimited costs for a war whose returns are increasingly unclear. So what they're trying to say here they're trying to put out there that maybe this is a signal that the US and Israel are no longer standing at exactly the same point in this war. And number 6, time is being bought for the American domestic front too. And here he's saying that maybe the 10 days gives enough time to craft the messaging, to give the media time to absorb what's coming next, to give the Republican political base time to align itself, to allow the opponents of this war to, or of this ultimatum, to scream and yell and let it die down. And then the White House can decide how they're going to package what they do next. So that's about managing the domestic front. Okay. And so this is a fascinating piece because, again, all it is trying to figure out what Trump is doing with this 10-day delay. Okay. So that's the state of things now. I don't know if I've answered any questions, but at least we now see how the Iranians are thinking. They are confused. I think they're kind of panicking over the fact that they don't know what Trump is going to do. Galibaf is denying that he's in negotiations. Trump says he is. I believe Trump. I believe that Galibaf is speaking to him. I believe that that's a mistake for the reasons that I laid out. But at the same time, the Iranians are signaling that they're very suspicious of the Americans, that they believe that to some extent, or that they believe that these negotiations may very well be just a cover for moving more military assets into the region. We know that ground troops are arriving. We have these aircraft carriers arriving. And they think it might be a cover for an attack. That's how they saw the 12-day war. There were negotiations happening. There were supposed to be negotiations that weekend, and then Israel launched the 12-day war. Same thing happened with this war. There were negotiations, then they launched the war. So the Iranians fear that that's what's happening now. And you can see as they're trying to understand Trump, but they're also trying to shape things and signal that if Trump doesn't get out soon, this war could end up being everything he doesn't want it to be: prolonged conflict, boots on the ground, more global disruptions in the oil markets, etc. So that's where things stand right now. I don't know what to think, folks. I don't know if there's going to be another, if Trump's going to escalate, if the negotiations are just a cover for that. He is unpredictable. I am worried about him making a deal with Galibaf, but if he does, it's just not going to last because the Iranian people won't stand for it. The regime will be very weakened. And if the people take to the streets, the protests aren't going to be able to be suppressed in the way that they used to be. So that's where things stand right now. Hard to say where things are going, but that's my report. God bless.